Dalzell, and I'm here with another episode of You Got Boston from my hotel room here in New York City. We get kicked out of Madison Square Garden pretty early, so recording from here after the Celtics 119-81 blowout loss to the New York Knicks, which ends their season, ends their bid to repeat and to become the first team since 2019 to get out of the second round after winning the championship. They will fall to the same pattern that we've now seen for years. And this was a disappointing game. I'm actually not going to talk too much about this game. The problems were plentiful. Early on, they fell by double digits. They were really never able to make much of a run. The only guy that had any sort of offense in the first half was Jaylen Brown, and he struggled with kind of taking care of the ball. He finishes with 20 points on 8 of 20 shooting in this one. But just across the board, Derrick White's 3 for 11, Jrue Holiday's 1 for 8. You just weren't really able to get much. Kristaps Porzingis, once again, just struggles in this one to find any sort of rhythm as he has pretty much for the whole postseason and especially in this series. And the Knicks were awesome. The Knicks upped their physicality. They upped their defensive game plan. I thought that was honestly one of the biggest differences between games 5 and 6 was that the Knicks just showed up and showed out and just really had a great approach to this one. And so the Celtics fell flat. They were missing easy shots. They were forced into tough shots. Rebounding was a massive issue in this one. And at one point I looked up and the Knicks weren't even shooting well, but they had rebounded 50% of their misses. And so that's certainly a losing formula. Jaylen finishes with 7 turnovers. I honestly have barely even looked at this box score because it does feel kind of inconsequential in the scheme of things. Luke Kornet started in this one in place of Porzingis, which I liked in theory, but honestly, he wasn't able to find any sort of flow. The Celtics didn't shoot like their worst game ever. They were 12 of 40, 30%. Some of those were late makes. But again, to lose by, what did they end up losing by? Almost 38 points. Like, pretty astounding finish. I don't think people saw this coming. I definitely did not see this coming. I thought that they were going to potentially be able to string together a couple wins here and close out the series in advance. And it was obviously going to be an uphill battle. As soon as they went down 2-0, regardless of the Tatum injury, it was going to be an uphill battle, especially the way they lost those 2 games. Pretty demoralizing finishes, pretty kind of, in a way, I hate to say it, but like they kind of choked those 2 games away. Both games that they had 20-point leads with 3 minutes to go in the third quarter and kind of in similar fashion, just were not able to score. Like, that's really where the series was lost. And I think they made some late runs. Game 3 obviously was awesome. Game 4, they had control of it early, and they lose that one. And then we all know what happened late in that game where, Jason Tatum ruptured his Achilles, and that becomes for sure the most kind of important thing out of that one. But they had opportunities, but ultimately being down 2-0, you don't have that margin of error anymore. And nights like tonight happen. This was an extreme version of that. But nights like tonight do happen where you just realize that, sometimes you just don't have it. Sometimes you just kind of fall flat. The problem is that when you're already down, 2-0, 3-1, you just can't afford it. And I think that's what we kind of ran into today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this game. I mean, I honestly feel like, what are we, 4 minutes in? I don't know that I have a ton more to say about this one, but I will talk about just kind of my initial reaction to the season ending, prematurely in my eyes. I didn't think this was going to happen. I was maybe a little bit taking for granted that they were going to make a later push, and kind of looking forward. And there will be a ton more off-season content. So subscribe to my podcast, the You Got Boston podcast, on YouTube, Apple, and Spotify. You can watch all of the post-game pressers on CLNS Media. Jaylen Brown, Derrick White, and Kristaps Porzingis, as well as Joe Mazzulla, spoke at this one. And there's going to be more pressers on Saturday, depending on when you're watching this. Maybe they're already out. So certainly a lot more to digest. We're going to do a ton of off-season content. I'm not going to get too ahead of myself because it's currently almost 3 a.m. as I'm recording this. But just wanted to put out an initial reaction to this game and to this loss and just kind of where the Celtics currently find themselves. So my first thing that I'll say is, I know a lot of people are going to be really disappointed. You should be disappointed. Celtics fans have high standards. Boston fans have high standards in sports, and this team was extremely talented. This team was a 61-win team, and they had every chance and every opportunity to advance, and I don't think they should have lost to this Knicks team. I thought the Knicks were going to lose in 5, and it's obviously turned backwards here. But there were a lot of different reasons why this happened. I think the first thing I'll say is this team was not at full strength, and this is not the injury excuse. I know nobody wants to hear about injury excuses, especially after the fact, but effectively they didn't have Porzingis, for this playoff run. And that was a massive kind of oversight. I think even just going into the Knicks series after seeing the Orlando series, I probably should have been like, he really didn't give them much in Orlando. And I didn't know that it was going to get worse. And he had a massive crash before that game one against the Knicks. And we talked to him after the game. He still doesn't really know what it is that he's been dealing with. He has been sick. He started being sick in February. They really needed him because obviously Jason Tatum out starting game 4. Jaylen Brown, I thought that he had good moments in this playoff run. His best 2 games were definitely the 2 games without Tatum, with the exception of this one. Masterful Game 5 performance. There was a really impactful one, especially in front of like a TD Garden crowd that definitely needed something to celebrate. He was awesome in Game 2 when Tatum was out with a wrist injury. So he had moments, but if you compare it to Jaylen Brown from last playoff run, I thought defensively he wasn't able to move as well. I thought that offensively you could just tell that he lacked the explosion and the burst. And he told us before the Knicks series, I'm nearing 100%. I don't think that he was. I think that he wanted that out there. I don't know for sure, but it just kind of didn't look like it from watching. There were moments where he had a clear lane where, like, if you've watched Jaylen his whole career, it's an automatic dunk, and he didn't dunk because he did not seem like he was really able to kind of get off of that leg. And so Jaylen was a limited version of himself. Porzingis, obviously, I think, an even more limited version. If Jaylen was at 60%, Porzingis was at maybe 10% of what he was giving you during the season and at his best. And so with those 2 guys not quite themselves, the margin of error just becomes slimmer. And I didn't think that Joe leaned on the depth as much as he could have, especially when you think about like what really made this team special during the season. It was, the Tatum Blue Cornet pick and roll, which was one of the best in the league. It was Peyton Pritchard's 6th Man of the Year campaign. And there were some moments for Peyton Pritchard in these playoffs, but I would have liked to see them lean on him a little bit more. And ultimately, like, if he struggles, he struggles. Like, other people were struggling too. And I felt like he became a little bit, sometimes they went to him a little bit too late. There were multiple games in the series that he played under 24 minutes per game, which I felt like at just a certain point you just needed more from him. And you saw when it came together, he was really impactful for them. Game 3, like, he was the hero in that one. And it started off the playoffs with a 19-point performance versus Orlando. So he had moments, but the depth that was such a strength throughout the season, they just didn't lean on as much. And I don't know if it was just a lack of confidence or if it was Joe just kind of sticking with the guys that have been there before. But it ultimately did become kind of a problem because, like I said, they didn't have the full health roster. So I think I do look at the season as a failure in a sense. I think that with this level of talent, like, you do have championship expectations and at least to get out of the second round. This is a team that's kind of gotten accustomed to making the conference finals. And it's something that I think people in Boston, reporters, fans alike, almost take for granted. But at the same time, I don't feel like, maybe it's because they just won the championship last year. And so it's like you kind of recognize how few and far between those opportunities are. I think it kind of makes sense why things didn't work ultimately. Like, this Knicks team was really good. First of all, hats off to them. They were a lot better than I thought they were going to be. They were a lot better than they were during the regular season. I think that they made some great adjustments. I think they had some guys, Mikal Bridges for one, who kind of won them a few of those games, who just were not a big factor during the regular season matchups. I'm curious to see how this round against the Pacers will go. I'm not sure that I have like a clear take on exactly how that'll look, or maybe I'll sleep on it and think. But ultimately, I think this team fought, and once they kind of choked away games 1 and 2, this one was going to be incredibly difficult to pull off. And so that's where the season went wrong to me. Yes, there were the injuries. Jaylen, Kristaps, Drew Holiday misses 3 games with the hamstring strain. He dealt with a bunch of different ailments this past season. This was a challenging year for him injury-wise, and he kind of joked at one point, like, guys, I'm old, like that's kind of what this is. 34 years old, a lot of miles on his legs, and he just came off of a finals run and an Olympic appearance and all that. So it's a tale of multiple things here. I think that they just were a little bit too banged up to really have a full championship run, but they could have happened. And sometimes it just takes the stars to align and a couple of plays to be made, and maybe they make they make one more play in game 1 and one more play in game 2, and they get out of the series, and maybe Tatum doesn't even get hurt. Like, who knows, right? And so it does come down to a couple things, and sometimes it doesn't feel that way because when you lose a series in 5 or 6 games, it feels like, oh, you weren't even close. Like, it didn't even go to game 7, right? If you lose in game 7, it's like, okay, you were close, right? but it's not always indicative. And I always go back to that Pacers series. I'll never forget that series where they sweep the Pacers, and you could go, if you don't look carefully, you could go back and say that was an easy one. They blew out the Pacers. It was 4 games. They didn't even lose one. And I know from covering that team and being in the building, and those of you that remember those games will remember just how many of them went down to the wire. Like that game 1, they're down by 3. It's Pacers ball. If Jaylen Brown doesn't get a deflection and hit that corner 3, they lose that game, and who knows what happens next, because they lost game 1 and it impacted them going into game 2. They overcorrected. I think that it a little bit kind of eroded their confidence, which it shouldn't have. But maybe they lose game 2 also. And now you're talking about they lose to the Pacers in the conference finals last year. And so as weird as it is, it's what makes basketball special. A couple plays, even if they're in game 1, even if they're in a 7-point game, can ultimately determine the difference between a second round exit and a championship. And you go back to like that Kawhi Leonard shot, which wasn't in the finals, but that 2019 Raptors team wins the championship because he gets that bounce, right? So you need a lot to go right. It's what makes 2024 so special. It's what makes 2024 live on forever. I know a lot of fans are going to say this core deserves more than 1 ring. It's similar with the 08 team. Like a lot of people feel like they underachieved. And I think if you get one in this league with this much talent, with so many teams loading up on stars and making savvy moves and developing talent year over year and doing everything they can to be competitive and contend, one is a victory. And like that's kind of like what I was thinking after this game, that so much has to go right. And this Knicks team is having a really special season. And they're about to run into a Pacers team that's also in the midst of a really special season that has pulled off games out of thin air, that like are just remarkable comebacks, down 7 with a minute to go, things like that. So I think the championship of last year should make fans feel a little bit better about this year's shortcomings. Jaylen Brown was asked about that after the game, and he said the opposite. He kind of said it makes it sting even more because they had an opportunity to go back-to-back and do something special. And I get that approach too, because ultimately they were on the brink of something really unique. And you want a dynasty, right? Because so many teams recently have won one championship between Giannis and the Bucks and Jokic and the Nuggets and all of that. So you want to separate yourself from that pack. And this wasn't the year they were going to do it, but I'll close with this because I'm not going to do a super long episode here because we do have a media availability in Boston tomorrow. And so we'll be getting up early and driving back for that and hear from the remainder players who didn't speak tonight. But I'll just close with why I'm optimistic about the future of this team and the future of this franchise, because I know a lot of people are feeling down about it. And Jaylen kind of talked about it post-game. You can watch his full presser on CLNS Media. But, I think obviously the Tatum Achilles rupture is a major blow to this team. It's a major blow for him. On a personal level, I do feel awful for him. Like that was probably the most emotionally shaken I've ever been from a basketball game, including games that I've played in, games that I've watched, family members. Like that was really hard to watch somebody rupture their Achilles and just understanding like the severity of that injury. But over the last few days, I've talked to experts. I've learned a lot about this injury. And while it's an uphill battle, I think that he has all the factors pointing in his direction to make a full and complete recovery. And he's young and he did the operation right away. And he has the best surgeons and medical staff around him and Kevin Durant, who's been through it and all of that. So I think there's a lot of reasons to be optimistic about him personally and also his play style. I think that it's going to translate well. And maybe he comes back late next season, in which case that would be awesome. Maybe he doesn't. It's really, I think, impossible even for him to know right now because you don't know how the first few months of recovery are going to go. But this team is going to be in the mix for at least a few more years. I really believe that. You have Tatum and Brown, and again, I'm counting Tatum because he's going to be back. I don't think they're going to trade Jaylen Brown this summer. We can talk more about that in future episodes. We have all summer to talk about potential and maybe current trades if trades do happen. But at the end of the day, this is a guy that there's a short list of players that are as impactful as him on both sides of the ball. And I hope that he can get fully healthy and whatever it is that's been bothering him with his knee that we still don't have a ton of information about. Like we know it's a bone bruise, but clearly it's something that's lingered. I hope that he can get fully healthy, but you have him, you have, Tatum. I really feel great about the guards of Peyton Pritchard and Derrick White. And both of those guys, I think, can shoulder a bigger load on both ends, honestly. Like I think Pritchard, has shown offensively what he's capable of. I know people are going to say, he was doing it in more limited opportunities, limited minutes. His efficiency never wavered this season, even in the playoffs. Whenever he got the opportunity, he always stepped up to it. This was probably his worst game of the postseason. And even in this one, if you look through the box score, like he wasn't really a massive problem. I wish he had been more aggressive early on because he just didn't take many shots. But I'm not putting anything on any one player in this game because it was a full team collapse. But I think between those two stars that are two generational forwards that are proven players that have been there, done that. Derrick White and Peyton Pritchard, and probably most importantly, Brad Stevens at the helm, who has just found ways to keep this team in the mix year in and year out. The future remains bright here, and maybe it's not where it was last year when you're fresh off a championship, you're bringing everybody back, and all of that. Like, certainly there's a lot more questions, and Tatum's Achilles injury does put a major kind of dent in things. But Jaylen said in postgame, he said, I know fans are feeling kind of gloomy about it, but everything's going to be fine. There's a lot to look forward to, and obviously that's a nice thing for him to say as one of the leaders of this team. But it does reflect kind of how I feel about things right now. There are a lot of NBA teams that I watch all the NBA teams and all the moves that GMs and coaches and all that make. This is one of the few franchises that I do think are in really good shape still, even though it's complicated and the second April makes things even more complicated. And there's going to be moves this summer. And I have no idea right now what moves those are going to be. If I had to guess, at least a few guys out of the rotation will be traded for something. But again, we don't know. It's all so soon. Even anybody that was asked about that today, we're just kind of not even ready to think about it. But even if you make some of those moves, say you get rid of Drew Holiday and Porzingis, which I think are two of the names that have floated around the most, like, I think there's still a ton of talent on this roster. And then there's some young guys that I'm excited about. I don't know that anybody wants to hear about Baylor Scheinman right now, as the Celtics just got blown out by the Knicks and have their season ended, but that's a guy that I think can be impactful in the rotation moving forward. So I'm keeping this one short because of the hour, because we have more media tomorrow, and I'll probably do something after tomorrow's episode and we can do a little bit of a big picture thing. But I figured it would be good to just give an instant reaction for those of you that are kind of reeling in the loss. And remember, the 2024 championship lives on forever. You don't lose it because you aren't able to repeat. It's incredibly hard to repeat. The sting that this fan base feels right now is the exact same sting that every fan base over the last 6 years has felt, because no defending champ has been able to get out of the second round. It's a remarkable trend that I will spend some more time thinking about it, as will Joe Mazzulla. He said post-game, a very kind of calm Joe Mazzulla, who was just kind of reflective and extended his appreciation for this group and kind of getting the chance to coach them. So you can watch his full remarks, watch everybody else's full remarks. I'll have coverage on CelticsBlog.com. As always, check out our full post-game show on CLNS Media, The Garden Report. We'll have more Garden Reports throughout the summer as well. But thank you so much for watching. As always, it has been a pleasure to do the You Got Boston podcast all season after every playoff game. I'm going to keep doing regular episodes. I'm going to figure out exactly what my recording schedule is going to be in the off season. I'll be at the full length of Summer League, so we'll have stuff from there. We'll have draft coverage and all of that. So lots of exciting things in the works. And if you want to step away from basketball for a couple of days, I also understand. I cover the WNBA, so I will be shifting gears with some of my writing there as well. So you can follow along on my Twitter, my social media. I'll be posting stories on that. So thank you as always. Enjoy the rest of your weekend. I'm sure people are pretty frustrated about this one, but it's always helpful to just kind of keep a big picture of kind of what this team has been able to accomplish and kind of what is ahead. And I think there's still a lot of promise moving forward. That's all for now.